As the people of Augustana, we are gathering around the theme of faithful, hopeful, and loving, drawn from 1 Corinthians 13. This week's focus is faithful. In the 4th chapter of Matthew, Jesus said, "Follow me." And immediately, the fishermen left their nets and followed Jesus. Listen now as we hear from others here at Augustana about their experience of faithful.
Well, I actually have both faithfulness for myself and for others. Many know that for 10 years I was the director of our local Habitat for Humanity housing ministry. And for myself, there was the, to have a job, if you will, that involves Christ. That was an experience for me, and faithfulness was everything about it. But what didn't happen is me going there totally without pay. I went because it was my job, and yet I was surrounded by people in every step of the way. I was surrounded by others who, this was their faith walk. This is what they were doing, and Augustana sends a good-sized contingent every year, a couple of times, and they do it by faith. And so I always felt a little like I came up short because I was getting paid and they were there doing it out of faith. And so now that I'm no longer with Habitat, I've retired, I am able to go and do it totally with faith, and it feels every bit as good as what I did when I was working there. So I'm glad to know that faithfulness was good for me, both as an employee of Habitat, but also now as a volunteer.
Yeah, I volunteer at a food pantry and Backpack Buddies. And the people I work with are wonderful. This is just their way of life, and many of them put in hours and hours and hours. And they just, I'm inspired by what they do. I'm inspired by what Food at First and Ames does. And I know they do that because they're called by Christ to do these things. So I try to put in hours but I feel called to do it because of them, and also I just feel that it's the right thing to do. I feel that my faith has given me a moral compass, and there is something to be said for justice and Christ and what Christ tells us to do.
Well, all of our families have been pretty filled with faith all the way through our childhood up through today. So it's kind of a family tradition to have that faith, and we're glad to be a part of it.
We were both raised going to church. I know I was raised going to church with my mom and dad and grandpa. And the three of us, they'd put us in between everybody so we wouldn't bother each other. But I can remember hearing my grandma sing and my dad would sing, and the pastor was invited to dinners, and everybody remembered him at the holidays. Farmers typically, my dad was a turkey farmer, so they gave him lots of turkeys, and the beef farmers would give him beef, and that's kind of how we grew up, and we raised our kids that way, to find churches and go, and the grandchildren, both grandsons, have been baptized through the church. And
Our families, our daughters and our grandsons and their husbands have moved a lot this year, so we had a lot of faith when they pack up a Jeep with a 4-year-old and a dog and head for Alaska. That's a long drive, especially in January and December. So it took a lot of faith and a lot of sleepless time making sure they got it, but everything went well there. And then Holly and Eli and George just moved here this week, so they had a long drive. So we had a lot of faith that they would make it, and we're glad that they did.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think probably the COVID-19 situation with the school board and the school and all the preparations that were made in order to allow the kids to go back to school. It wasn't my first choice. My first choice was a hybrid plan. But once the decision was made for them to go back, so many things took place to make sure that it was as safe as possible. And I had to have faith in the people I work with and in the people at the school board and all the teachers that they would do the very best that they could in order to make sure things were as safe as possible for the kids.
Powerful words, powerful witness from our fellow members at Augustana. You are invited to consider this invitation to be faithful followers of Jesus.